You'll be able to view it again at your leisure on the town's website through YouTube. And we also do ask that you mute your microphones during the presentation because we know life sometimes happens and a dog barks or somebody shows up at your door. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon because, as a lot of you have mentioned, it is a beautiful day out there. So thank you for spending the afternoon with us. Oh, also what we'll do, Tim, is we'll do our Q&A at the end of your presentation, if that works for you.
That would work for me, that's fine.
Okay. And what we'll do is if you have any questions, if you think about it, even as Tim is speaking, you can always use the chat feature to type in your question, and we'll come back to it at the end of the session and address your question. We will also open it up where you'll be able to raise your hand and ask your questions at that time to Tim. So let's get started. So welcome everyone to our coffee and conversation. Today we are very honored and delighted to have our special guest, Tim Speed. Tim is a volunteer at Colburn Center. And a little bit of background about Tim is I'll just read this little bio here. So Tim comes by his interest in aviation honestly, despite the fact that he is not a pilot and has no military experience. His father was a navigator in World War II, flying special operations in a Handley Page, Halifax. Tim first became involved with aviation as an Air Scout while still wearing short pants. He obtained a business degree in the United Kingdom and joined British Overseas Airways Corporation after graduating from university. He served as a station operations officer in Dubai, in Tokyo, and Beirut. He immigrated to Canada with his family in 1980. Before retiring, he was the CEO of a large air freight and logistics company. He has been a volunteer tour guide, speaker, and educator at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum since retiring in late 2010. And today he is here to share everything about the AVRO Aero. So welcome, Tim. And Tim is the one with the big image of the AVRO Aero behind him. There we go.
One second, let me just get this right. There we go. Okay, well, thank you. Add my thanks to Nicole. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today, because it is a beautiful day, and after last week, we deserve it. As Nicole said, I'm a volunteer at the Warplane Museum. I was just saying that we hope to be open. I don't have a date yet. The management are having a meeting at the end of this month, about the 27th. And we should know something early June, depending what the lifting of the restrictions are, if there are any, on the 2nd of June. And we do hope to be operational by then. Our aeroplanes are flying, or will be flying, once we have trained our pilots how to fly them again and see if they've forgotten anything in the last 2 years. But today we're going to talk about the history of the AVRO Aero, probably one of the most controversial events in Canadian aviation history. And my subtitle is Politics, Timing and Bad Luck. What we have to realize, if we go back into deep history, before World War II, Canada was primarily an agrarian society. By the end of World War II, we were an economic power. We had built 600 ships. We had built 1,100 aeroplanes, including 430 Lancaster bombers and 500,000 cars. A lot of this was done under the supervision of C.D. Howe, who is a minister in Mackenzie King's and then Lester Pearson's administrations. After the war, he was the Minister of Reconstruction. In the meantime, the Soviet Union, our erstwhile allies up until 1944, had developed a strategic bombing fleet. The aeroplane on the right looks very much like the aeroplane on the left. The aeroplane on the left is actually a B-29, the aeroplane that was used to drop the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Some of those bombers, when they were operating over Japan, were damaged and had to continue their flights into the Soviet Union rather than going back to their bases. They were then interned by the Soviets because Russia and China and Japan were not at war. Stalin gave the order to copy exact the American B-29s, and the result was the Tupolev 4, otherwise known as the Bull. So this posed a new threat to North America, particularly once the Russians had developed atomic weapons, and the RAF required a two-seat long-range interceptor aeroplane. They published the requirements for this aeroplane in 1946. The job was given to AVRO Canada. Now, the Lancasters were built by the Victory Aircraft Company, a Crown corporation, which at the end of the war was sold to Hawker Siddeley, a British company who also owned AVRO in the UK and named their Canadian subsidiary AVRO Canada. They became a hugely diverse organisation and a very large organisation, the third largest corporation in Canada. They built the C-102 jetliner. It was flown first time in 1949. It was only the second jet airliner ever to fly, and it only just missed beating the de Havilland Comet by a few weeks. Ultimately, it was cancelled. The TCA, Trans-Canada Airlines, were not persuaded to buy any of them, and the Korean War had started, and so the focus changed to military operations. So it suffered the same fate as the Arrow. It was broken up and destroyed. The aeroplane that AVRO Canada built was the CF-100 Canuck, and we have one of these in the museum. Entered service in 1953. You'll notice that it is a straight-winged aeroplane, therefore it is not supersonic. One of the test pilots, the man who signed the picture that Nicole was showing me just before, he actually got the CF-100 to go through the sound barrier. It would only do it when it was going downhill. It was not designed as this airplane. Nevertheless, entered service in 1953 and was the world's first all-weather jet interceptor. It was designed for Arctic patrols to discourage the Soviet bombers, and it operated over the Canadian Arctic, and it also operated as part of the NATO, Canada's NATO contribution in Europe. And it could fly when nobody else could fly. That's what it meant by all-weather. When it flew at night, it could fly during the day when the visibility was poor, and its systems and radars enabled it to still engage enemy airplanes. However, the Soviets continued to develop their strategic bomber force. And by 1956, the Tu-95 Bear was operational, and the Tu-16 Badger. Now, these airplanes were much faster than the Bull, the B-29 copy. And so whereas they were not necessarily faster than the Canuck, they were sufficiently close in speed that the Canuck could not make effective interceptions. Interestingly enough, the Bear is still operational in the Soviet Air Force, but now primarily, and it is probably one of the world's fastest and noisiest turboprop airplanes ever built. So the Canadian Air Force issued a specification for a replacement for the CF-100. Specifications called for a Mark II, twice the speed of sound aeroplane, capable of flying at 60,000 feet. The aeroplane was rolled out in October 1957. But the RCAF specifications were very much at the leading edge, if not even beyond the leading edge. And they were also highly inflexible. They demanded that there be no external stores on the aeroplane. Therefore, it had to carry all its fuel and all its weapons inside the airframe. There was no provision for in-flight refueling, and it had a single job, a long-range interceptor. There was to be no provision for other roles. Consequently, the Arrow was a very large and complex aeroplane. And it had a very limited export market potential because it was designed specifically to solve the Canadian problem. It was also designed to be 100% Canadian. The UK and France and US were invited to show interest in the aeroplane, but basically their needs were different. And you can imagine that the UK and the US are never going to buy a frontline fighter that was built somewhere else. France, in fact, was interested in buying the Iroquois engines, and I'll come to that. So we had a very complex aeroplane, limited market potential, and an interesting comparison with what Saab in Sweden were doing to solve a similar problem, where they basically built an aeroplane from off-the-shelf components. To make matters worse, the original plan called for a Rolls-Royce engine, which was cancelled. The radar and the fire control system did not exist and had to be developed. And the Sparrow 2 missile, which had active radar, which would have been a first, i.e. once it was released by the fighter, could actually find its way to the target using its own radar, was cancelled in 1956 by the US Navy. So the consequences, Canada was simultaneously developing a very advanced aircraft with leading-edge engines and materials like titanium, an untried fire control radar, and missiles considered too advanced by the US Navy. These pictures are the Arenda Iroquois production line, which is in the building on the right-hand side, the east side of Airport Road, close to Derry Road, which you probably know better as the International Centre now, a convention centre. But that's where they were building the air engines, which was right across the street from where they were building the planes. But taking all those things into account, what could possibly go wrong? Nevertheless, the aeroplane was very effective. It performed very, very well. Supersonic on third flight, through 1,000 miles an hour, 50,000 feet, made just shy of Mach 2, and it was still accelerating and climbing. And it was using American engines. The first 5 examples, the only examples that ever flew, were equipped with American engines because the Iroquois engine from Arenda was not yet available. But there is no question whatsoever that the aeroplane would have performed exactly as specified. So why cancel it? Well, here comes the politics. First of all, there were national politics. Diefenbaker won a minority government in June 1957, and he campaigned heavily against the Liberal spending policies. This may sound remarkably familiar. In 1958, there was another election, he gained a majority. There was huge personal antipathy between Diefenbaker, Lester Pearson, and C.D. Howe. Diefenbaker also inherited a very poor economy. Global politics and timing. Here comes the timing issue. The day they rolled the Arrow out, the Russians launched Sputnik 1. It changed the world. They now believed that the manned bomber would be replaced by the intercontinental ballistic missile. Therefore, there was no need for manned interceptors. The US and the UK confirmed they would not be ordering any Arrows, and the French were still interested to buy the Iroquois engines for their own Rafale fighter development. And at the same time, in 1958, the US and Canada signed the North American Aerospace Defense Agreement. Personal politics. AVRO had appallingly managed PR. They were considered a corporate welfare case, and in the December of 1958, there was a scathing article in Maclean's magazine accusing them being a corporate welfare case. Crawford Gordon was the CEO. If those of you who've seen the CBC miniseries about the Arrow will remember, he was played by Dan Aykroyd. He was a womanizer, hard drinking, smoking, foul-mouthed, and here he was talking to an abstemious prairie lawyer in John Diefenbaker. There was no way whatsoever they were ever going to get along. And finally, they lost the support of the defense establishment. The Arrow was starting to cost so much money, the equivalent of $11 billion at current values based on GDP. Now, up until last year, we would have considered that an awful lot of money. Now it's peanuts, but we wouldn't have spent that kind of money. But what it meant was the admirals would get no ships. The generals would get no tanks. And the air marshals would only have a long-range interceptor. They wouldn't have any transport aeroplanes or reconnaissance. All that would have gone. So they removed their support from the project. The relative unit costs in 1959 dollars, 12.5 million for an Arrow, about 111 million in 2020 dollars. Whereas a Beaumark missile, I'll talk more about that in a minute, would only cost 1.2 million. And a Voodoo, an F-101 Voodoo, would only cost 2 million, second hand. Interestingly, the current price of an F-35 fighter is 89 million US, which is around about 111 million. So we're going to pay the same for American fighters that we could have paid for fighters of our own. This is the minutes of a cabinet meeting. I don't propose to read it to you. It's regarding the constellation of the Arrow, the production and cost sharing of the replacement, and the acquisition of nuclear weapons. It was vital that the Arrow was cancelled before the 206 flew, because 206 was going to fly with the Arenda engine, the Iroquois engine. The Iroquois engine was lighter and 50% more powerful than the American engine that had been used on the first 5. So if they had allowed 206 to fly, Canada would have had the world's air speed record and the world altitude record, at which point it would have become politically unacceptable to cancel the aeroplane. 20th of February 1959, Black Friday, what became known as Death Row. Somebody rented a Cessna and flew over the factory in Malton, took these pictures. Now, not only did they actually destroy the aeroplanes, literally they were cut up into small pieces. They destroyed the engines, although we do have one at the museum. We have an Arenda Iroquois engine with big holes cut in it, so it could never ever be restored. But you can come and see it. And the tooling and the data and the blueprints and everything. Now, what they said at the time was that the RCMP suspected that there was a Russian spy working for AVRO, and they didn't want this material to get to Russian hands. Another shot of Death Row, the aeroplanes being cut up. The consequences, we lost 25,000 high-value jobs, 15,000 of them with AVRO, the other 10,000 with other parts of the supply chain. These people went to work for NASA on the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, and some of them went back to the UK or France to work on the SST, the Supersonic Transport Concorde. Opportunities lost. There was a potential for a Mark III Arrow, which would have done a Mark III at Mach 3. So an aeroplane that would have done 10 years ahead of the famous SR-71 US Blackbird reconnaissance aeroplane. And also their computer capabilities. They had amazing computer capabilities that they used in the design of the aeroplane, which are only nowadays being replicated by the current generation of computers. Most of the engineers were approached and offered jobs the day the cancellation was announced. There were representatives of other engineering companies waiting in the parking lot with contracts in their briefcases. So what about replacements? Well, the first one was the Beaumark missile. Now, the Beaumark missile is an anti-aircraft missile, not an anti-missile missile. So where's the logic in that? It was also designed to be part of an integrated defense system, integrated with manned interceptors. And also, to do any damage at all to any aeroplanes coming in, it had to have a nuclear warhead because it was so inaccurate. It was cancelled by Mr. Trudeau 1.0 in March 1973. After the nuclear debate led to the collapse of Diefenbaker's government. Of course, I mean, from the American point of view, it was an ideal thing to have based in Canada, because that meant that any bits of Russian nuclear bombers that were destroyed by the missile would actually fall on Canada and not on the United States. Arrow replacement 2, we no longer, having decided that actually we could use a manned interceptor, we no longer had an industry capable of producing one. Fortunately, our allies to the south happened to have 66 used F-101s lying around in the desert, which they sold us for $2 million a pop. It was to perform exactly the role that the Arrow had been designed for, a role that Diefenbaker said would not be performed by manned interceptors. And it was equipped with both heat-seeking missiles and a Genie nuclear air-to-air missile. So think about that. This is a nuclear missile that's going to be fired at other airplanes, and we have one at the museum. If you want to get really, really close to a nuclear weapon, come to the museum and see one. Thank you very much indeed. How about questions?
All right, thank you, Tim. So what I'll do is I'm just going to do a little check of our chat box here. If you do have a question, there are a couple of ways to ask your questions. You can use the chat box and type in your question, or you can also raise your hand. You can even just physically raise your hand if that's easier for you. I'll just do some scanning here to see if anybody's waving their hand. Do I see any hand waves?
I see Lynn and Paul and Bill Miller so far.
Okay, so let me just go back here. I'm trying to see everybody at the same time and it doesn't work. Let's see. Bill, are you able to unmute yourself, Bill, to ask your question?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now. There was a program to recover some of the test models that were shot over Lake Ontario. Do you know what happened to that program?
You know, I don't have an up-to-date answer to that. I understood that they had located at least one, but whether or not they had been able to recover it, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Lynn and Paul, for some reason I can't see you on my screen, but if you are able to unmute yourself and ask your question. Oh, there you are, right there. It's Linda. Okay, I was looking for Lynn. You have two names.
Yeah, I know it's Lynn.
Okay, Lynn, go ahead with your question.
Oh, it's Paul.
It's
Paul's question. Go ahead, Paul.
I believe there's a full-scale model replica of the Arrow. Where is it stored now?
Another good question. It was originally at the
Downsview
Aerospace Museum based at Downsview. And as you probably know, they ran into some issues with their landlord and were booted out. For a time, it was actually erected at the International Centre where the engines were built. I believe it's in crates in a Mississauga warehouse somewhere.
Has the Warplane Heritage ever thought of acquiring it?
We absolutely do not have the room.
We need to build another building.
As I say, well, funny you should say that. We do own a piece of land adjacent to our current facility, and the plan is to develop it. We need some money, but certainly, I mean, as I said, the aeroplane is the AVRO Arrow. It was a big aeroplane. I mean, the CF-100 is a big aeroplane when you look at it from the point of view of a fighter. And no, we wouldn't have room at the moment. We don't have room for the aeroplanes that we have.
Do you think how much pressure was put on the government from the US to cancel the Arrow because they wanted us to buy their stuff, the Beaumont missile and other aircraft, like the US usually do this kind of thing? If you remember, they did it. I can't remember the designation, the swing wing aircraft in England that was developed.
It was the TSR-2.
That's right, TSR-2.
TSR-2, yes, I remember that. A very similar situation. I believe it probably had some effect, but as I say, I think that you know, once the costs had got to the level where they were, and they lost support of the defence establishment, that was really the final nail in its coffin. There was all, you know, I said, you know, politics and timing and bad luck. And it really is all those things coming together. I don't think you can particularly point the finger at the nasty Americans and say it was all their fault.
Yeah.
Much as we may like to.
Yeah. The destruction of all the jigs, fixtures, drawings, etc. You think that was a ruse by the RSCMP just to justify what they did with all the blueprints, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know that ever really came out what the true thinking of that was, and why they would do that, why they would destroy the aeroplanes completely to make sure they never ever could be restored or restored, or the program couldn't be restarted. There's probably something going on there, but I don't know what it was, and whether or not it was. Yeah, the excuse was, well, there was a spy who was going to pass all this stuff on to the Russians. Well, the thing was, if there was a spy, he'd have already passed it all on to them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
We have another question. Paul, or sorry, John McGrady has a question.
Yes, well, actually, I kind of have two. One is directly related. I wondered what the landing gear was on the Arrow. Was it? It wasn't that clear. Is it? How many wheels were on the main gear?
There was only 2 on each side.
Oh, and then 2 at the front, right?
And 2 at the front.
Oh, well, that's not much for a big, heavy plane. The other thing was in regard to the copying of aircraft and so on. The VC-10 that the British had, didn't the Russians also copy that to some degree with one of their earlier?
That was a Tupolev as well, a Tupolev 144
yes.
or 164. They also copied the Concorde.
Yes, yeah.
They had the Concordski, but it was eventually used as a freighter because it was so unreliable.
It fell out of the sky at the air show.
It did. It fell out of the sky at the Paris Air Show.
I remember the VC-10 coming in to Pearson there, carrying crew for a NATO thing or something, and all soldiers, and they were all facing backwards.
Yes.
And that's was a much safer way to fly, according to, which makes sense. I mean, you put your kids in backwards. So.
Yeah, I used to work with BOAC, and we used to fly the VC-10s, but in the passenger configuration, in the commercial configuration, it was a standard configuration. But when the Royal Air Force Transport Command got them, yes, but they did that with all their planes.
Oh,
The Britannias as well. That was just their way of doing it, and as I say, it was because aeroplanes don't fly backwards into mountains, so that was thought to be safe.
yeah. Good old BOAC, eh?
Yeah.
Thank you, John. We have a few more questions. So we have 3, and we have Marlene, Colin, and Rolly. Just to let you know, I can see that you have questions. So we'll start with Marlene. Marlene, are you able to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yep. You mentioned the blueprints and the plans. My husband, as a young man, was part of that. And he was a lithographer that copied the plans and photographed all the plans. And when it finally came down, he wasn't allowed to leave the dark room or any of his areas. He had RCMP right at his elbow, destroying them as he was finishing them. So it was a very tense time in his life.
It was. I believe that there have been some recovered. Before I think before the announcement was made, some people had actually managed to get some copies of some of the documents out, and they have since re-emerged when people presumably have been going through their papers and things, or maybe when the individuals have passed and their children are going through all their papers, and they suddenly find they've got a blueprint for an AVRO arrow.
Yeah,
but
he wasn't allowed to go anywhere. He couldn't, even his lunch pail and his clothes were examined as he came out of the dark room and to his area. So I don't know how they could have got out of the building.
Okay, thank you, Marlene. Okay. Our next question is from Colin. Colin, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Tim, is there any truth to the rumor I heard that the Iroquois engine became the Bristol Olympus engine as used in the Concorde?
I don't think so. The Olympus engine, the Bristol Olympus 593 was the one that was used in Concorde, and the Bristol Olympus engine was developed much earlier than that. It would have been developed around about the same time as the Iroquois. It is entirely possible that some of the engineers who had worked on it ended up working for Bristol aircraft.
Maybe that was it. Yeah.
And a lot of things. I mean, if you look at the if you look at the wings on the Arrow behind me, and see the notch and see the shape of the wings, and you might see some familiarity there with what happened with Concorde. They used the same technique where, because of the heating of the skin, because of the friction at twice the speed of sound, they passed fuel through pipes close to the skin of the aeroplane to cool the skin of the aeroplane. And that was a technique that was used on Concorde as well. So there was a lots of transfer of ideas and technology. But the Olympus, the original Olympus, ended up on the AVRO Vulcan.
Yes.
So the Vulcan had 4 not reheated engines, but regular Olympus engines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Just have some comments here in the chat section, and then we'll go to Rolly's question. Linda just has a comment here. My father worked for AVRO and told us that the men who were assigned to destroy the Arrow cried the entire time they were doing it.
I'm sure they did. It must have been absolutely heartbreaking to have spent that amount of time building something as significant as that and then being told to destroy it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so next we're going to go to Rolly, if you want to ask your question, and then I will read a question that came in from Ken. So Rolly, are you able to unmute yourself?
I think I'm unmuted, am I?
Oh, you are. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I was on I toured a British Air Force base in Germany in the 70s, and they had a number of F-4 Phantoms in RAF Decor that they had purchased from the United States. So my question would be, when did this not buying from other nationalities change?
Largely because of the cancellation of the TSR-2. And they didn't have an alternative immediately. The alternative that came was the Tornado, but that was a Panavia Tornado. That was a joint venture between Britain, Germany, and Italy, I believe. And as somebody's pointed out in the chat, that was a swing wing aeroplane, whereas the TSR-2 was not a swing wing. But I think that times change. At that time, Britain was a leader in the manufacture of jet engines, and certainly there was no way that they were going to, and jet aeroplanes. And they also, had produced a number of jet aeroplanes, the Vampire and the name escapes me, which had actually flown during World War II. So they weren't about to give that up and go and buy somebody else's aeroplane, I don't think. But eventually, needs must. It became such an expensive venture to build an airplane, as Canada had found out, that very few countries had the resources to do it alone, and basically only 2 did, the Soviet Union and the United States, and now China.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolly. Next, I'm going to go to a question that was in the chat box from Ken. Ken says, why scrap the engines? They could have other uses.
Excellent question. I don't know. I mean, there was nothing else on the drawing board that would have used engines like that in Canada.
Okay.
And so you'd have had to have sold them to somebody else. I've said the French were interested in them. French would have bought them.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to read a few comments here. I think it goes back to someone was asking you whether or not the AVRO had been recovered. I'm assuming from Lake Ontario. And Hal wrote a comment, it was recovered, heavily damaged. The full-size model is on display in Northern Ontario.
Oh, it is. Okay. I did not know that.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to see if there's any more comments in here.
And then he found this picture of him and I in this photo album, and he taped it in.
Oh, okay. And just Hal here, at a 25th anniversary of Black Friday reunion, many blueprints were on display. So another comment from Al. Sorry, Hal. And another question here, someone is asking, is there a way to forward this presentation video to someone else? So yes, we are recording this presentation, and sometime next week it will be available for viewing as many times as you would like on the town's website. If you search virtual programs, it'll bring you to that page, and when it's ready, it'll be posted on there, and you can actually just send the link to anyone who you think would enjoy viewing this. Okay, so do we have any other questions? I'm going to do a little scan here again, my screen, to see if
Lynn and Paul, Nicole.
Yeah. I saw waving hands. Okay, Linda and Paul, go ahead.
I think the jet aircraft you were looking for was the Meteor, wasn't it?
It was the Gloucester Meteor. Thank you very much.
And also, can you give us some insight to the bending of the Arrow's wings to suit the landing gear?
Not really. I don't know all the details of that. I know there was a question earlier on about what the landing gear was like and the fact that it was fairly small related to the size of the aeroplane. And I know that one of the reasons for it was there was nowhere in the wings for anything bigger. But I don't know. I know they had to do a lot of different work with the wings, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think they bent the wings so that the landing gear could be shorter. It lifted it. They bent the wings so it lifted it higher off the ground with the shorter landing gear, or something like that. But I'm not exactly sure what it was. Yeah, that's me done for the day, I guess.
Okay.
I'm bailing out.
And let me do another scan, see if I see any other hands waving up in the air. I do not. All right, I saw an owl. Okay, so it's Lillian, you are asking, so this is for the town of Oakville. You would go on to oakville.ca, and then you would search in the search bar virtual programs, and that should bring you to the page that has all of our previous Coffee and Conversations, as well as other virtual programming that the town has offered that has been recorded and to be watched on YouTube. I hope that answers your question. So I guess if there aren't any more questions, that might bring us to the conclusion. I hear some laughing. Is there some more hands waving?
Paul has another question.
Oh, okay. I'm not scanning fast enough. Okay, I need a bigger monitor. All right, Paul, go ahead.
This is to do with the museum.
Yes.
Is the tracker going to fly this year, and also the TBM Avenger?
No and yes. No, the tracker won't be ready this year, but the Avenger will.
Do you think they'll be giving rides in it? Because it's big enough to give rides in it.
Oh, absolutely. We don't fly airplanes that you can't sell rides in.
No, we've been up on. Lynn and I have been in the C-47.
Yeah, no, you can get. There will be rides available in the Avenger, but we're still waiting for Transport Canada to give us the final certification on the aeroplane.
Yeah. How do we test, somebody to pass to fly these older aircraft when we don't have the original pilots around? What do? Do we learn to fly it and then we pass on the knowledge and then we test one another?
Basically, yes. Yeah. Yeah, most of our pilots are obviously extremely experienced. Some have military experience. They practically all have some civil experience. Our chief pilot was a very senior captain with Air Canada. He'd flown the North Atlantic 99 times, and the 100th time he flew it in the Lancaster. And they go to ground school. They have to go back to ground school every year, and then they test each other, yes, because they won't be current.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks again.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Paul. And I think we have one more question from John. And just before, John, you ask your question, I just want to mention to everyone, so you have time, Julie has, in the chat box, has put in the website, the link that you can access the virtual programs, the recordings later on, if you wanted to either take a little snapshot of that or write it down for anyone who's looking for that. So thank you, Julie. And John, go ahead with your question.
I asked Tim if the museum would be interested in a picture of a nice framed picture of a Spitfire that I have here. I haven't had it up for quite a while, and we redecorated downstairs and everything. So I just wondered.
I did answer you actually.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry.
And it's you'd need to get in touch with Erin, who is our archivist,
Okay.
and it's erin@warplane.com.
Okay.
Way above my pay grade to decide what we can take and what we can't take.
I thought you were the boss.
Yes. Yeah, that'll be the day.
Aside, have you ever seen that the U-2 take off? The original spy plane?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The U-2, the original American spy plane? The one that Gary Powers.
There's certainly there's nothing. We don't have anything like that. I
No.
have actually seen one. There is a few years ago. I was on a Norwegian cruise around the fjords, and we went to a city called Bodo. A city, it's a town. It's a very small town.
Yeah.
And they actually had an air museum there, and they sent a bus out to pick us up, and they took us to the Bodo Air Museum, and there they have a U-2 because that is where Gary Powers was supposed to land.
Oh, right.
After he transited, he flew from Turkey over the Soviet Union and was supposed to land in Norway.
Right.
And they did have U-2s based there during the Cold War.
Yeah, they used to come in occasionally with the SR-71 to the airport here in Toronto, and seeing that U-2 take off, because the wings would just dump fuel out from either side until it got airborne, because they had such flex in them that the fuel would come out both sides of the wing until it got airborne, and that would seal it with the pressure. It's quite something to see.
Yeah, I have heard that.
Thanks. That's all.
Okay, we'll do one last call for questions. Do another little scan. I don't see anything in the chat box. Okay, I think that might be it. Julie, I don't know if you see anybody raising their hands.
I don't see anybody. Nope.
Okay, all righty. So I guess that brings us to the end of our presentation, or I should say Tim's presentation. So thank you very much, Tim, for that wonderful presentation. I have a feeling as soon as the museum opens up, you are going to have a lot of new friends come and visit you, and they're going to all ask for personalized tours. Or they're going to say, I want that tour guide. I want Tim.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm there every Friday.
There you go.
Could I jump in there, Nicole? I just wanted to mention to everybody on Thursday, this Thursday at 1:30 p.m., we have another seminar through Zoom, and it is with our SWAG, which is our Seniors Working Action Group, as well as CART Halton. And we're putting on a presentation about senior housing options. So we're going to feature a financial planner, a real estate agent, a contractor, and a community development officer. And we're going to talk about options that you may have: reverse mortgages, home equity lines of credit, retrofitting your building or your home to make it accessible for you to stay in your location, as well as home sharing and nanny suites. So if you know anybody in your life that this might be applicable to, yourself, a neighbor, a family member, friend, feel free to share that with them. To register, you can just email, as always, Nicole or I using our email, or scww@oakville.ca, and we will certainly add you to the list or send you the registration information, I should say. I've just put the email in the chat box, and we'll send you the link for the Zoom meeting on Thursday. And then also in June, we're having a June is Seniors Month event, and we are celebrating all of the contributions of our seniors on June 17th at 1 o'clock. We have the Fiddlesticks who are going to be there. We have a guest speaker. We have visits, pop-ins from the mayors and staff. It's going to be amazing. So hopefully you'll join us there as well.
You're not talking about the appreciation. Is it the appreciation week?
So sorry, Surrender, what was that?
Volunteer appreciation.
Oh, volunteer appreciation is next week. If you are a volunteer with senior services, you would have received a link. If you haven't received a link, please let Nicole and I know. That is next Tuesday at 1:30.
Sure, thank you.
So I'm going to check the chat box. I don't see anything new. I think we're good. So just a round of applause for Tim, just to show our appreciation for putting this together. Thank you so much.
And do come and see us, please.
Yes, I'm sure you have a lot of people.
Yeah.
You have a lot of new friends.
Right.
Hi, Renee. So thank you, everybody, for spending part of your afternoon with us. I hope you get to enjoy this lovely weather.
Yeah, go and enjoy the sunshine.
Yes, exactly. So thank you again for coming. Thank you to our wonderful guests, and
Thanks,
enjoy
Nicole.
the rest of your day, everyone. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.